Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. 100. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to the second Innovation Series event. Thank you to each of you for being here, and a super warm welcome to our friends and colleagues joining us from LSU Alexandria, LSU Eunice, LSU Shreveport, BRCC, Southern University, and Southeastern. I hope I didn't miss anyone. The Health Science Center at Shreveport. Thank you, Sasha. So before we get started, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously helped put this event together. So if you had a hand in the planning or organization of this event, please stand and be recognized. If you're already standing, please wave. A special thank you to the Innovation Series Task Force, Dr. Radhika Krishnadas, Jennifer Morissette, Courtney Abear, and Justin Rice. Where is Justin? He's probably out in the lobby doing stuff. We couldn't have done it without you. So additionally, we're grateful to the experts who are here today to share their knowledge and experience. We have a day full of wonderful sessions. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Vice President of Digital and Continuing Education, Dr. Sasha Thackaberry.
And I'm going to stand up just to immediately sit down. I actually want to say a special thank you to Hala because she did just an amazing amount of work and really got the team around her. And it's just, I love being able to just walk in and not have to think about a thing. So big thank you to Hala. So the day starts with this panel, and it's all about innovation today. So innovation in teaching and learning, innovation in the field, things that are going on. And we managed to recruit a fantastic panel of experts here, two of whom I know personally, and John, welcome to our madhouse here. And so I'm actually going to let them share a little bit of their background before we get into the questions. And first we have Jeff Borden, who I first met when you were the Chief Innovation Officer. He had a very interesting title in St. Leo and was doing some very, very cool things. So Jeff, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
How about that? Thank you. There you go. Thank you for having us. My name is Jeff Borden. I was the Chief Innovation Officer at St. Leo University for a number of years. We created a learning ecosystem is what we called it. We used that term very deliberately because it had interdependent parts, one upon another. And we were trying to really change learning at scale. So to me, innovation is always couched with learning innovation. We weren't creating entrepreneurial experiences for small businesses to really come out of. I know there are some programs like that at Michigan State and some other places that have done that. But what my remit was to try to change teaching and learning at scale. I have since moved back to Colorado, which is home for my family and I. I'm the executive director of the Institute for Interconnected Education. It's basically a teaching and learning center. Go around the world talking to people about best teaching and learning.
Thank you very much. My name is John Tannous. I'm a researcher with EAB. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with EAB, but we are a higher education research and consulting organization based in Washington, D.C. We work with about 1,200 colleges and universities all across North America, consulting on a variety of matters. In my 8 years with EAB, I've contributed to a lot of our studies and initiatives spanning topics like online education, undergraduate and graduate enrollment, marketing and recruiting, academic program development, and others. And I also just want to offer a clarification because I'm beginning to see some puzzled looks by the audience. This is not a crimson sweater vest. In fact, I just want to offer, I think on behalf of the nation, a thank you for this weekend. So.
My name is Michael Moore. I am currently I wear two hats: Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Arkansas System Office in Little Rock, and then I also serve as the Chief Academic Officer and Operating Officer for our online school, which is known as Eversity, and I asked at the end of the season to please not vote us out of the SEC. We realize we play like a high school team right now, but and be kind to us in a couple of weeks. I started my life as a faculty member, as a political science professor, and spent 20 years at the University of Texas at Arlington, a good bit of the time on the academic side before moving to the evil side of administration, and led the online efforts there, and spent some time working with the UT systems online efforts. So I'm very happy to be back again for the second one, and look forward to visiting with you throughout the day.
This is like that talking staff or ball that you like throw from person to person. So one of the things that I did not acknowledge at the beginning was, as those of you passed through, you saw our active duty military and veterans as you walked in, and we are here on Veterans Day, and I think it's very, very important to acknowledge all of the contributions that the men and women have made who serve our country. So if you are a veteran, if you're married to a veteran, if you know a veteran, or if you have a family member who is a veteran, please stand. All right. This is a big deal, and one of the things that we had some conversations about whether this would be a good day to do this, and one of the reasons we really decided it is because online learning has a long history of serving active duty military, of serving veterans, and the history of what all of us in this room are very passionate about is all about access and ensuring that folks who can't physically come to a location still have access to education, and that's even kicking it up a notch when institutions like LSU are able to provide that education. So going backwards a little bit, but thank you for sharing with all of us your expertise, and I know Michael Moore is back for a return engagement. And I wanted to set the stage a little bit, but the format of this is going to be very loosey-goosey, and so Hala, are you going to be the one who's running around? So Hala is going to be running around, despite the fact that I believe she has heels on, and taking questions from the audience. So we're going to set it up with some very kind of general questions about innovation, questions about where the industry is going, and then if you at any point have a follow-up question or you want to jump in with something, please feel free to do so, because we really want this to be your time where you can interact with these experts. And then we're going to follow it up with the sessions in this room this morning, and then the split out sessions this afternoon. So the first question, I'm just going to go down the road just because that's easy, but if y'all want to tap each other and cut in, please feel free as well. So the first question, just to get us rolling, is what is your definition of innovation? What does innovation mean to you? But what does it mean within the context of higher ed and where we are in higher ed in our nation's development?
This is a question I have thought about a lot. I've got some stuff out there that you can actually download and use in terms of reports. But when I think about what innovation is, to me, it is the juxtaposition of the old versus the new to try to determine which of those things is the better way forward. Now, better is, obviously different to different people, but there usually is a better path that most people agree on. And when it comes to learning innovation, that's a similar definition to really what learning is. You are picking the better thing based on some new information you've just received. It doesn't mean the new information is better. It just means you have to pick which of the two is better in order to move forward. I can actually show you an example of this, and I wanted to get people interacting just a little bit. So here's what I'd like you to do. Grab somebody, look at the people at your table at their shoes. Anybody who's got shoes that require tying, here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to please untie one of those shoes for the other people and then retie it, but rather than tying it like you're used to tying it, so the loop and then the thing around, I want you to go the opposite direction around the loop. Okay, go the other way that you're other than you're used to doing it. Okay, go ahead.
And all the gentlemen in the room suddenly get attention.
It's one of the few times.
I'm super fascinated by what this means. Jane McGonigal, she
Yeah.
did one of the EduCause things that
Yeah.
she had us do massive multiplayer thumb wrestling, which was really interesting.
She's awesome.
She is.
Okay,
So much fun.
looks like most of you are done. Now, before I ask you a question, I want to tell you why you just did that. There is a decent amount of research that suggests that how you've been tying your shoes your entire life is wrong. Most people tie it in the Western culture. Most people tie it the same way, the same going around the loop, the same direction, and that's the weakest form of that knot. The strong form of the knot is what you just did. But again, most of us were not raised to do that. So let me ask you, how did it feel? Hard? Awkward? Weird? Did somebody say oogly? Did I hear oogly? I don't know, all right. Yeah, it's awkward, it's weird. But it's better. It's a better knot, a stronger knot. It will last you throughout the day. In fact, I can sweeten the pot by saying, by the time you die, you will have spent about a day and a half of time retying a tied shoe. Tomorrow, when you wake up, how many of you are going to change how you tie your shoes? Probably nobody. Nobody, right? So you are choosing to do the not better way, you're choosing to do the worst way because that's how you learned it. Well, I think one of the crises that higher education is coming into is that we've got a lot of students who have learned things that are probably not accurate. They've learned to do things poorly. Go talk to your young people that you know about Columbus and his history and see what they know about Columbus. If you've read the book Lies My Teacher Told Me, you'll find all kinds of things that they know to be true that are not true at all. So, what do we do about that? To me, learning innovation is about that juxtaposition of what is known versus what is best or what is right or what is correct, and trying to find the best way forward choosing that thing.
Thank you. So just to continue this Eagle Scout theme, I'm going to ask you all to start a fire. And, no, I'm just kidding. I don't think I have nearly as thoughtful of an answer to this question, particularly around the definition of innovation, but I guess I want to share a couple of thoughts about where I think the sector is in regards to innovation, which is that I think we get a bad rap. I think that policymakers, I think that many folks within the sector are very fond of saying that universities are bad at innovation, whatever that means, or that we have little innovation to show for ourselves. And I think that's a misunderstanding of what goes on across a typical campus. I think anytime a professor produces groundbreaking research with a new model or a new theory, anytime somebody decides that students need a new class that has never existed before and they create a syllabus from scratch, that's innovation. I think at a grassroots level, there are early adopters all across this and every campus who are incorporating new pedagogical techniques into their classes and trying to be better. I think the problem with higher education is not that we don't have innovation, it's that we're not very good at scaling innovation. And so we're not very good at taking those things that work one off and then filtering and sorting between them which of these pilots are worth keeping around, and now how do we do at a larger level, and how do we take across the campus those things that worked. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that that are both practical and cultural. I think that many university budget models, for example, may not necessarily provide enough incentive for innovation, such that growth, for example, may feel like a punishment rather than a reward. But I also think it's true that the culture inside many departments is such that any faculty member who wants to encourage her colleagues to do something different and uncomfortable, to tie her shoes a different way, is not going to be rewarded for that when they go up for tenure or when they go through whatever rewards and promotion processes exist. So I think we need to think a lot about how we scale innovation, not just how we sort of see it one-off, and then how we create cultures that heroize those who take on the less glorious work of scaling innovation, not just the sort of person who started it in the first place, and I think is usually who is heroized in our campus myths.
The joy of going third is that all the really brilliant things have been said. I'm going to borrow a definition of innovation that I recently heard, which sort of resonated with me, and they defined innovation as the place where creativity meets implementation. The place where creativity meets implementation. And that really resonated for me, because that seems to be kind of, how do you know that your creative idea, the thing you've come up with in the shower in the morning or on a piece of paper while you're sitting in a restaurant, that's just a creative idea. It doesn't really become something innovative or that changes something. We think of innovation as something that changes something. You actually have to go out and implement it, and hopefully do it at scale. I'll echo what my colleague said about where I think higher ed is at. We innovate every day in higher education. We're really, really comfortable with it on the research side. And I'm going to make a plug here, or maybe say something that's a little bit controversial, maybe not. Realize we're sitting at a flagship tech campus. Go Tigers. That's going to be my default answer every time I get stuck, because I'm just going to say go Tigers. Flagships and Ivy League schools and elite schools sometimes are real resistant to innovative things on the pedagogical side of things. We don't, and we should be, because we've got a really, 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 really long history of working, right? U.S. higher education is the premier in the world, and we don't want to mess that up. And so there is a tremendous presumption to sticking around and doing what we've done before. I'll tell just a real quick story to kind of illustrate my point. Online education's been around for a really, really long time, and I'm not even talking back to the correspondence stuff. I'm just talking about literally online education. And all of a sudden, it got tremendous credibility when a few schools like Harvard and MIT, and Sasha's going to nod her head down here, decided to get into the MOOC movement. And you heard where Coursera got going and edX, and oh my gosh, if they're going to do it, that must be legit. And those of us that have been doing online education for about 15 years thought, you're a little late to this party, folks. We've been doing this for a really, really long time. And that, to me, is kind of the cadence at which innovation tends to happen. Sometimes it doesn't happen at the elite universities, the top, most premier universities, when it comes to the teaching and the new innovative business models. It happens in the labs and in the field all the time there. And I sometimes wish that the elite institutions would show the same enthusiasm for change across the entire spectrum of the institution, and also not look so much down on those that are maybe downstream a little bit, because I think that's where a lot of the real innovation starts, and then it bubbles up.
Actually, can I say one more thing? Okay, I guess I want to say one more thing too, which is that I think that often what takes place on campus that is not a very productive dynamic is people who are pro-innovation on one side and then those who are supposedly against on the other side, as supposedly being Luddites who are throwing sand in the gears to try to slow the pace of change. And I think the truth is, and I am on this panel here and think this day is incredible because innovation is so important and we have to embrace it, but I also think it's true that higher education, despite our advanced degrees, our quantitative reasoning, our supposed elevated ability to reason than we might think of other industries, I think we are just as fad-driven as other industries. And I think the truth is, I think there are well-meaning folks who get frustrated with innovation theater, with the latest buzzword, that smart toasters are better than regular toasters. Just this, I think, notion that pervades our society that whatever new feature is always better than what existed before without any consideration of its actual utility. And so I think we have to create a space on campus where this conversation is not just a binary of who supports innovation and who doesn't, but that there's productive uses of innovation and there's not, that not everything that we were told was innovative and was important is going to change the world, right? We all remember where we were when we were told MOOCs would put us all out of business, and that has not quite come to pass. Competency-based education is another example where my firm is not supportive, but feel that it's not something that every institution at scale should embrace for a variety of implementation reasons. So I think another thing that will just take us to a better place as an industry is to create a world where you can be pro-innovation but care about the details and want to understand what's the set of assumptions that says that that innovation is important and that's worth examining.
And just to piggyback on a couple things, I think it's very interesting, the competency-based education, MOOCs, all of those kind of innovation drama or innovation theater, right? The important thing is not the model itself, but what its impact is to higher ed over time, right? So this is an argument. I just came back from WCET, and several of us were having this conversation, which is, all good education is competency-based education, right? Should that be a fringe movement? You know, innovation, there were a lot of things that came out of the MOOCs that weren't MOOCs, right? Things that mattered. So, you know, the intersection between workforce relevance and higher ed and how those pieces can come together, it's not, there's gonna be 10 universities, right? But everybody hears 10 universities in 10 years and we're all like, well, that's clearly not a good idea, right? So I thought that was interesting. Just a couple of things. If you all would like to check out that book, which is one of my favorite books, Lies My Teacher Told Me, that's by James Lowen. And then I did want to just briefly mention one other thing that came up at WCET too, and we've been getting a lot of calls at DCE about how we're setting up our engine, because we are putting together models that are similar to ASU for components, that are similar to you know, some of the standalone institutions, but that are similar to marketing and recruitment practices from other institutions. And some of the questions are, you know, always in the field, like, are these important things that are competitive advantage that we shouldn't share? And I always say, yeah, let's share it all, because it's really easy to talk about and really, really hard to do. And I think that's where that intersection, Michael, that you were talking about, of like, yes, we can conceive it, but do we have the will and the ability to be uncomfortable tying our shoes until it becomes a new habit? Do we have the ability to do that? Are there any questions about that before we move on to the next piece? Oh, awesome. Just wait one moment.
Thank you so much. My name is Professor Mustafa Diak. I'm with the Associate Vice President with the Southern University System. And I do a lot of work on open education nationally and globally. And I really appreciate the discussion that we had. And I'm still wondering sometime, what is the role of the institutions when it comes to really the implementation of innovations? That's something that I'm asking myself. And the reason is just, I do know that I'm in the open education business since, for instance, the launching of the Merlot organization. I work on that actually to make that happen. The state of Louisiana just have a new bill which is pushing institutions really to think about college affordability. Our students are not buying the book, they're failing the courses. It's extremely expensive for them to buy those books. And now we have really quality OER that are really available throughout the globe in here. And you wonder what's going on. I mean, seriously, when we talk about innovation, I can tell you here that since 2000, I've been trying to push open education resources, but it's not happening. So I'm wondering if you don't have that institutional support and buy-in. We need to mean it, though. We're never going to scale that up.
Yeah. Very, very good question. And actually, I am thrilled to share that our library has been incredibly supportive of OER, to the point where we actually have our own interface that you can look up things from Creative Commons and other places, which is fantastic. For those of you who maybe are not aware of this movement in the room, the Open Educational Resource Movement began a long, long time ago. And actually, the UN kind of coined that term back in, what was it, like 98 or something. But Open University in the UK was like 30 years before that. So the whole concept that educational materials should be both affordable and accessible has been around for a really long time. But of course, there's the business model of publishers, right? And then many universities were looking at now, why are our faculty doing all this fantastic research, publishing all these papers, and then we have to go back and pay for access to those papers as an institution because of how they're published, right? So I think those pieces are a really big part of that. But to affordability, I think that's one of the ways we're talking about what does innovation at scale look like, because then you can bring down the cost for the students. But I'm really interested to hear what the panel has to say. And also, for those of you who may be not aware of it in the room, there is a statewide initiative going on that does provide some sort of seed funding for faculty to create OER. But to your point, it really hasn't been, I don't think, as widely embraced as it could be. So what are our thoughts about affordability?
Throughout my career, I have straddled both formal education and commercial people who are supporting education. There was a time I worked at eCollege, which is the learning management system that was acquired by Pearson. So then I was acquired by Pearson. And working for Pearson, suddenly I was aware of what was going on with publishers. I'll tell you some interesting things about that. When the publishers first heard about OER, they weren't scared at all. They thought, this is silly, people will never be able to get this to work together, they'll never be able to congregate and get these things to work in concert. Today, they're not laughing, and they are definitely scared, because it has taken out a significant chunk of their market. And quite honestly, as it should, because the information is out there, it's available, it just needs to be packaged. So what's exciting to me, when I was at St. Leo, we went down the road with ACE Learning. There's a bunch of companies that are really trying to create an environment where you can go out and search for these really good assets. Of course, that means in the short term, it's a bit more work. And I think for some departments, for some professors, it's too much. That short-term work is a little too much until they start seeing some relevance and acceptance from some other folks. Other early adopters have really gone gangbusters with it. And they've gone out and they have found and they have assembled essentially their own products, their own books. One of my favorite stories is a master's class up in the Northeast, where they actually had the students write the book for the semester. I mean, think about the learning that takes place there. Think about what you have to know to craft a textbook. And then every semester after that, the students edited it and revised it, and they learned tremendous amounts, and they never used an actual book that they had to go purchase. So there's some really creative and clever things, and the OER market has definitely taken a chunk out of the existing publishers, and I think that that's a really good thing. I don't know that it will see a tipping point in the next 5 to 10 years. I would love to see that happen. I just think there's just such a methodicalness to adoption. We'll see if that happens.
Go ahead, grab it. No, I'm good. Oh, you're good. Okay. Go Tigers. I'm a big fan of OER, and if you were to ask me some of the future trends, innovations that are going to happen in higher education, this would have been my #1 on my list. It's flying below the radar screen, I think, because of the hard work that's involved, but I think it truly has the potential to truly transform higher education for our students. I mean, math teachers in the classroom, or in the room here, not a classroom, the math teachers. Why do we have a new calculus book every couple of years? It hasn't changed in centuries, right? The knowledge is pretty fundamental from way back with those guys that wore the white robes, walked around Athens and Greece and places like that. I got lucky to be able to have the opportunity to build a brand new institution from the ground up. We are 100% OER because we had that choice at the very beginning to do this. But it's possible to change fully operating institutions as well. University of Maryland Global Campus now, they've changed their name and it's not as easy as UMUC, which a lot of us are familiar with. They're 100% OER at the undergrad level, working to be that way at the graduate level. It is challenging to do this because of the work that's involved to keep the materials updated and make them accessible. And I'm just going to add one cautionary note here for those of you that are, I assume we're all here because we're interested in innovation. I'm really troubled by the phrase the OER market, because the thing that was appealing about OER at the outset was the fact that it is free. And what the publishers are starting to do now, and it's going to all take all of us to be a little bit evangelical about this, is that they are trying to find ways to make money off of the OER market. And so you've got publishers like Cengage and others that are actively engaged in providing OER materials. So think about that. They're going to charge you for free. That's what they're trying to do. They're going to charge you for free because they're going to provide all the crack that faculty members have become so dependent upon that wrap around a textbook, right? So some of the more senior faculty members in the room will remember when it was just the adoption of a textbook, right? That's all you got. Then it was those little transparencies you laid on that funny looking device that had the lamp on it. Remember that thing? Then came the test banks that you loaded on your PC. Now it's the AI stuff in the computer labs for science that automatically feeds the next questions. We've got so dependent upon all that wraparound stuff that what they're doing is they're not going to sell you the textbook anymore. That's still going to be free, but it's going to have all this wraparound stuff in it as well. And so they're right back in it. The promise of OER is significant, but we've got to be a little bit evangelical about this to keep the publishers at bay, because otherwise it's going to end up right back to where it was.
Interestingly, the OER conference this year, David Wiley from Lumen Learning, that is the last time that he's going to organize it, which was interesting to me because I actually think that might in some ways be a good thing, because we see some of these innovations starting and creating their own organizations, doing their own advocacy, and then over time, those are just part of education, right? And so we should all be kind of embracing those concepts. The other thing I do want to acknowledge is OER, and this was not me that came up with this. Amy, from a colleague of mine from SNHU, came up with this. She said, OER is free like a free puppy. So it's not, it does require effort and work and nurturing on the part of the institution, but you can actually create both a human ecosystem around that and a technical ecosystem around that to make these things discoverable and usable. Yes?
One of my dearest friends in the world is Professor Gordon Sanson down in Australia. He's a full tenured retired biologist. He's the preeminent person in the world when you want to know about teeth. He was actually the witness on the dingo ate my baby case. You guys know that? Really? He was the guy. And he was very upset with the result, by the way, of that case. But he took over the Teaching and Learning Center after 30 distinguished years as a biologist and a biology professor. And it took him about 3 years to realize most teachers don't know how to teach. Most professors don't know how to educate. And it really frustrated him as he started to do this. So as he went into the content part of that journey, he would go to the textbook publishers and he would ask them a really fundamental question. And you should try this when the rep comes into your office next time. He would say, "What's wrong with your textbook?" And of course they would say, nothing's wrong with the textbook, perfect. And you go, "Well, I don't want a perfect textbook." He goes, "Well, if I have a perfect textbook, why am I here? I have things I want to talk against, talk about, say that's wrong, that's the way they've thought about this isn't done very correctly. What are those hook points that I have?" And they would get flustered and leave. And he said OER has exactly that. So a lot of people that started talking about OER early on said, "Well, I don't like it because it's not always correct, it's not the best, it's not perfect." And Gordon would say, that's exactly what makes OER usable by a teacher. So we have something to hook into and start to teach against.
One of the questions that I'm interested in hearing an answer to.
Sasha, we have one comment.
We have a question? Where is it? Oh, okay.
Just to add, really, because that's really excellent contributions that I'm hearing here from the panel. But I think we still have some kind of challenges here and some threats, and I think we start talking about those, starting with the publisher. Because what you see right now is what is called inclusive access. So it means that when a student gets in my university, as part of the tuition, I built in already the cost of the book, In some institution, they can opt out, but in some they cannot. At Southern University, I know it is the case. So it means when you are a faculty member trying really to deploy, for instance, this kind of innovation that we're talking about, you still already have some problem that you need really to deal with.
Right, yeah.
Internally. I think that's a big issue, and I think you mentioned as well some big organization adopting now OER, like Amazon is doing that as well now, producing their own. But you have even the learning management system companies, you know, in some innovation like adaptive learning management system that are using now to bring costs down, you know. Learning environment, for instance, the engagement platform in learning management system are using also, you know, the open education resources. So we have some threat, but just the issue of scaling up in our institution, quite frankly, I'm looking forward to meeting with you, see what LSU is doing. And I will share what we're doing at Southern and at the national level at the same time. I know I'm hosting, as part of the Innovate Conference, I'm presiding over our HBCU Summit on Open Education that I have started, you know, 3 years ago. It's really taking off, really, at this.
Fantastic.
But thank you so much for an excellent exchange here from the panel.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So another question that I have is, what is not innovation anymore? So what are the knowns that we have? And I think one of the pieces to this is sometimes innovation in context at different institutions looks different. So what might be innovative to one institution is a very accepted norm at another institution. But what do we know from a higher education perspective in general about online learning that is just a known? Like, doing this thing is not innovative anymore. We've moved beyond it.
My first reaction to that is online learning is not innovative. The Institute was just brought in last year. I will not say the name of the institution, but it is a very well-known institution in New York that asked us to come in and in 2019 say, should we go online? And it was a very difficult conversation to have with them. I mean, the answer obviously is yes. Now, the one thing that was nice was they could start to take advantage of technologies that we have today that we did not have back when a lot of us started this back in the late 90s. But just because they can integrate and they have interoperability and those sorts of things, they still had a massive learning curve. And we went in and we actually did a cultural analysis of the faculty, the staff, everybody. We asked everybody through a poll, and then we actually went in and did anecdotal information, a qualitative analysis after that. And we found that there were people saying, literally, these are the quotes, online is of the devil. Online, I will quit from my position at this institution before I ever teach an online course. And so they were just asking the question, is online too innovative? And we basically had to go in and say, you're way, way behind. So when it comes to online itself, there are a lot of things that are really effective practices and best practices, but let me just tell you one more thing that I would suggest is not right. Back in 1992 is when I started my master's program, and I began to go down the road to become a professor. I wanted to teach in communication and education, and those were what my master's and my doctorate were in. As I did that, we were asking a very specific question. I don't know if you remember 1992. This was the year that Nick Nolte won Sexiest Man Alive. Do you guys remember that picture of him on the People magazine? No? All right, it's okay. I do. You do? You remember? Okay. We were asking a question, how do I best teach my students? That was the question. That was the only question we had because that was the only paradigm that we knew. And so as I started that journey, as I was talking to my mentors and these professors, that's what they were trying to help me do. Fast forward about 10 years later, and now you've got, remember when Nick Nolte got arrested drunk in his hair, right? It was not a good look for Nick. Well, I think that our question had sort of transformed at that point because online was around now and people were doing it. And so the question was, how do I do online what I do face-to-face? And I think that the question mirrored Nick Nolte's horrible picture, his mugshot. It's a bad question because what we're assuming is that what happens in the face-to-face classroom is the best experience. And we now know, we have a lot of research that suggests often it is not. The lecturing is horrific. We know that it is one of, if not the least favorable ways to learn. And so we start asking, well, how do I translate what I do here to this modality and just do it the same way? That's the wrong question. When you come back now to when Nick won his Academy Award and he's looking better, I think we're starting to finally ask the right question, which is, how do I take advantage of the web? How do I take advantage of the power of connectedness, the power of the internet, the power of all these different things that I can do? That's when you start to see innovation. That's when you really start to say, okay, I can do something differently than I do in my face-to-face class. Why? Because it's better. Because my students will actually learn better. They will remember this longer. They will take this in and actually contextualize it. They'll connect it to other ideas. We can do that. So we've got to get out of that sort of mindset of just translating our face-to-face experience online. That is the wrong question to ask, and you're not going to see innovation that way.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly endorse all of that. I think we're past the point of fighting about modality, and we should be fighting about instructional design now. You know, what most of the research pretty overwhelmingly has shown is that modality is not what dictates student learning or course outcomes. What dictates those things are instructional design. You know, you said earlier, MOOCs maybe didn't change the world, but they created a permission structure that got professors, because of the prestige factor, to put a course online who never would have before. And in the process of working with an instructional designer to do that, ended up encountering questions maybe they hadn't been asking in a long time about how people learn effectively. In the same way that you said, maybe competency-based education hasn't changed the world, but it got people to think, well, maybe programs ought to have outcomes that are clearly delineated. So these innovations maybe didn't scale the way people thought, but they had a useful lesson for us. I think the key takeaway from the online movement right now is that instructional design or course redesign is not innovative, right? The notion that we can reduce DFW rates while making sure that, you know, students continue to score the same on instructional assessments, showing that we're not just watering the course down, but we're actually improving learning. I don't think that that's innovative anymore, and I wish we could all move to a place where we can just think about effective pedagogy and not sort of just fighting over modality, which is a really sort of lazy way to go about that.
Go Tigers.
All right. Oh, we have a question.
Good morning. My name is Riaz Firdaus. I am an adjunct faculty at the College of Business, and I'm an associate professor at Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady University. Thank you, the panel. Thank you, Hala, and thank you, everyone. My question is, actually it's not a question, but I'd like to hear from the panel about it. When I decided to come to this meeting, I felt, I thought about innovation. And one of the things that I thought about, what it led to is that innovation itself, and then like disruptive innovation and technology transfer. Okay, so when we think about it in global level versus when you think about it in local level, the perspectives do change to me. And I'd like to hear the panel's thought on when we talk about innovation in our locality, in Louisiana, in LSU or surrounding universities, what exactly do we need to foster? Okay, so out of these 2 or 3 options, like if we have 100 faculty, there would be innovations at every point, and to some extent. And then when we are talking about MOOCs, we are talking about OER, we're talking globally, right? Mm-hmm. So that distinction, need to be defined. So I'd like to hear from the panel about this. Thank you.
There's a lot there. So first of all, thank you for the comment and the question. I think one of the things I would just note from a global perspective is just the access that is exploding to the internet and therefore to information globally. So I think it's I'm trying to remember what the stat is. I think it's in the next 10 years, we're gonna have another 4 billion people connected online, which is when you talk about the amount of information that can be shared, the new discoveries that can be shared, it is really just remarkable. And the computing power, the digital divide piece is having to do with, I think, sharing how to use the technology, not assuming that because folks know how to access something in an app, they can actually effectively discern what is effective information, what is dubious information, who's pulling the wool over your eyes from just a digital, competency perspective, being able to figure out what information is legit. But I think the access part is a huge component of that, but we have challenges with that here in Louisiana. I mean, just locally, there's not high-speed internet everywhere, and that's a challenge. And then one of the concerns that I have is net neutrality too. I don't think we've seen what is gonna come down because of that commoditization, and I'm worried about that from an equity standpoint. But I think we could talk about this in a bunch of different ways, so I'm just gonna open it up. How do you feel about this stuff?
I'm going to talk next hour, so I don't want to spend too much time. I want to let Michael talk. I do want to say one thing. I don't think that technology should be synonymous with innovation. We always used to say at St. Leo, if technology doesn't allow you to do something you couldn't do without it, don't use it. Then you're just forcing the issue. It's a nice to have, or it's a toy, or it's fancy like that. We would always really try to say people are what it's all about, and if the technology helps people do what people do best, then I think you're in a better position. But again, I'm going to talk for a while, so let's hear.
So let me take this from maybe two ends of the continuum, and I want to start at the global level. To some extent, I'm less worried about the technology piece of it. I remember years and years ago, I had an opportunity to travel to South Africa, and I was amazed at the number of people that had cell phones at the time. I didn't personally have my own cell phone at that time. It's because they skipped run and wire, right? They went straight to the satellite. And so there is, to some extent, ubiquitous technology out there, and there are ways to deliver online education by controlling the amount of stuff that you put in video and things like that. That's not where I think the barrier is going to be for places like LSU and the American universities to get into third world countries. Frankly, I think the problem is the business model, because we're going to have real trouble. I've worked with a couple of efforts that have tried to do this. Think about what you charge for a class here at LSU. I should have looked it up before I came here, but I know what we charge in Arkansas, and it's roughly at the flagship about $1,000 per course, and that doesn't count the book, which should be free, by the way, but it's about $1,000 a class. Try to charge that price point for 1 3-hour credit course in a third world nation to an aspiring young person who wants access to a public university. It's possible to deliver the course electronically to get it there. They simply can't afford to pay it. So you could come up with a business model that would charge a differential tuition rate in a third world nation. Let's say we drop the class down to $50. Well, now you're delivering an LSU course for $50 when you're charging your tax-paying LSU, Baton Rouge, Louisiana citizens $1,000 a course. We got to figure that out, and I don't know what the answer to that question is. It's really, really difficult. I think the concerns are more on the policy side, the tuition-bearing side, and there's just a whole different way that they approach the consumption of materials in the third world. I encourage some of you to read a book called The Wealth at the Bottom of the Pyramid. So we go to Costco and Sam's, and we buy shampoo by the 5-gallon drum, and they buy it in little tubes like you get inside a hotel room, and they make that last a month, right? So it's just a whole completely different mindset about how you consume things. Now, let me continue down on the other side of thing real quick about how easy it is sometimes to encourage innovation. I'm going to go back to the OER example real quick, not because I want to beat that drum, but just an example that comes to mind real quickly. For relatively small amounts of money, universities in the United States have been very, very successful at incentivizing faculty members to go to OER. Temple University is one of the first ones that I know that did this. We kind of copied their example at my university in Texas, and we're doing it in Arkansas. Incentives that range from as little as about $2,500 up to about $4,000 a class, depending on the amount of effort that you pay a faculty member to agree to the fact that if you pay them that stipend, they will eliminate their textbook for their class and cultivate OER. Now think about that for a second. Seems like a lot of money if you'd multiply that across every class. But here's what the university can then do. They can say for that $4,000 investment in that class to convert it over to OER, Then take the number of students that are enrolled in that class, multiply it by the price point of what that $250 calculus textbooks would have been, and take it down to your legislature and show them what a $4,000 investment to a faculty member to convert a book does. It returns thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every term on converting that material, and it multiplies. So yes, it takes some effort, it takes some work, but financially, it is a fantastic argument for public policymakers to see from public universities about we're investing in helping students control the cost of their education.
All right, so we only, oh, Aron's.
I have just a question because you were talking about, by the way, I'm Arend van Temmert, I'm from the College of Human Sciences and Education. Oh, sorry. There is some talk about learning and modality and so on. But one of the reasons why it's so good to have online learning and actually in-class learning is actually that connectivity to professors. If you have that connectivity, it has been shown that actually students learn better. So if we are just gonna make classes much bigger by going online, which some people think that we are doing, then probably we will be on a declining route. So where do you think that the tipping point is? And well, maybe you have some other comments on this.
From my perspective, just briefly, and the data has shown this pretty conclusively. Everyone says they prefer blended learning, but students register then for fully online, which is very interesting. And we've had some conversations in the field about this, and we think that the future, some people think, the future of blended learning is actually going to be synchronous and asynchronous. So having those synchronous opportunities where we have Zoom at LSU, so as an institution, you can do the whole Brady Bunch thing. I mean, I love seeing my students. I noticed a difference in engagement in the classes that I teach when I offered, and there's a couple of different simple ways to just combine that pedagogy, combine that model in a way that still works for an asynchronous need, but then you have synchronous options in the course. But I am actually going to pass it along and let our guests speak for a change.
My dissertation was on class size in an online class. And I had access to thousands of classes at the time because it was just as I was finishing up with the learning management system that I was effectively the chief academic officer for higher ed for them. The sweet spot that I found in my research was 25 to 30. That's the number. 25 to 30 students. You're going to reach the network effect. You're going to have pockets of groups, which is what you want. Rather than having what a lot of people thought for the longest time, that the ideal was 17. It turns out that they thought it was 17 because the original Blackboard courses only took 17. And Blackboard got so big so quickly that it was like, you know, the old grandma's ham example where you cut off the end of the ham and they argue and they say, why'd you do that? And she goes, my grandma did it. So they go to ask the grandma, why'd you do that? And she said, well, that's as big as my pan was. Right, so we had the same thing. So 25 to 30, I think, is the number. As you get into MOOCs, I think one of the problems that they started to experience was that they couldn't get that network effect in smaller clusterings, and that's always been a struggle and probably always will be. So my best recommendation, my dissertation's out there. You should check it out. No one's ever done that, so.
So. I don't think that this is what you're saying necessarily, so let me take the question out of the context of the way you frame the inquiry, and I will say that I think when some people pose this inquiry, the problem that I have with it is that we're taking face-to-face as the default, and then now we are saying an online class inherently is bigger, and so then is that worse? And to that, my response to people who would frame the question that way, I would point out there are a heck of a lot of courses that feature hundreds of students in them in a face-to-face format in a lecture hall and have essentially no meaningful interaction with the professor. There's an old phrase that online education effectively begins in the 11th row, right? At some point when you're so far back, you're essentially looking at a screen of a professor standing in front of a PowerPoint slide, right? There are bad face-to-face courses that just consist of lectures and then a midterm and a final. And there are also bad online classes that just consist of taking the PowerPoint slides, uploading them to a learning management system, and then having a quiz. So again, my issue, not with the specific inquiry, but the way that sometimes this question is asked in bad faith, is that it presumes the superiority of what we do now, and then asks if the alternative is better. And I think to your point about instructional design and modality, that's a set of assumptions that are worth investigating. I think that so much of the way we even think about class size is influenced by our models of what we've always done. We at EAB tried to do a study where we were going to survey professors on what they thought the ideal size of classes were in particular disciplines. And what we found is that the numbers that they cited had to do with the size of the classrooms in the buildings where that department had traditionally hosted classes. So again, to your point about grandma's ham, I think we would love to say that there are these magic numbers. I think what we have found is that they're very much based in the things that we've always done, right? A 700-person class taught online that features a series of low-stakes assessments where there's graduate assistants who are discussion leaders working with a small group that are engaging in back and forth can probably actually offer a lot more sense of a connection to the instructional team than somebody standing at the front of a 900-person lecture hall. So I think that's important to think about.
I love how efficient his answers are sometimes. And actually, I just wanted to leapfrog on that too, that there are so many examples of different instructional models and instructional teams and coaching and what that community building looks and feels like in sizes. The 25 to 30 is something that I think is very common across the industry as well, because it does enable that sort of community building. I think there's different ways for different types of institutions to kind of figure that out, how we're doing that while still supporting scale. So I think the coaching models that some folks have, I know that we use Instructional Connections and some of those other small group opportunities. Really interesting stuff out there. But again, questioning the assumptions that our translation is where our default conversation should start on that. So we are at time, and I know that because Hala's setting a time. Do you want to come up here and direct our audience as to where we're going next? I want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. And actually, we had a plane issue, so thank you for being brave enough. I always have a little plane anxiety, so I really appreciate it when people fly to come here.
Another round of applause for our wonderful panel this morning. So we're getting started here in about 10 minutes with Dr. Jeff Borden. Refill your cups and come back.